Welcome to part two of Uncommon Conversations, episode 23, special 9/11 edition with Daniel Wilson. We were just talking about the gentleman from Washington who's running for Congress, who's helping to coordinate campaigns and sort of just the basics of campaigns. There we go. Yeah, there we go. This will work this time. Boom.
All right, we back?
And we're back. Cool.
Nice.
Awesome. All right. So you were talking about building the coalition.
Yeah. So I think that we're just doing things different. So not only like what you and I are doing here outside of politics as just humans engaging in political discussion, but that is being done on several different levels and various walks of life that has never been seen before. So on a personal level, we're engaging across party, regional, ideological lines and having meaningful discussion. And then I'm seeing that also happen in our political forum where, you know, a lot of us haven't hit the national stage yet, but especially as, you know, we get closer to the election, I think come next January, there will start being a lot more discussions of these are the progressive candidates or these are the young, you know, the young candidates challenging. And I think when everybody sees how many of us, number one, are not only running nationally, there's so many of us under 40 running for office right now, I am absolutely blown away. And no, we're not the youngest ever. I think, you know, AOC is holding one of those records at 28, and, you know, there's some other, you know, youngest mayors being elected. So, you know, at 37, I'm not going to be the youngest congressperson ever elected, but we are showing up in record numbers. You know, before that was a one-off. There was one here, one there, you know, a young person, this or that. But we are now showing up in droves. And part of that is, like we were talking about earlier, the lifetimes of crises that we've experienced in a 20-year span of our adulthood. You know, I've been having this conversation to where it's blown my mind that I don't know what year you graduated high school, but I graduated in 2002. So 99 was Columbine. 2000 was not only the dot-com bubble burst and also, you know, what I see as the first politically stolen election of our lifetime with Bush versus Gore and the hanging chads, at least politically affected, where you can see political manipulation of a party affecting our electoral system. Whether we agree with the win or the lose, it was the first time I was aware of it. So 99, the Columbine shooting happened. 2000 was formative for a number of reasons. 2001, you know, 9/11 happened, and then I graduate in May of 2002. Those are the first 3 years of like my life where I'm politically aware, or even just you know, out of puberty, adolescence, whatever. And I'm just like, boom, boom, boom. These three things happen, and then here you go, you're out into life. And then, like we talked about, 2 years later, this 2008 collapse. All of these other things have happened. You know, the school shootings haven't stopped since Columbine. We've been at war ever since. Record economic collapses that are once in a lifetime happening repeatedly. And I, you know, people, you know, one, why are you getting involved so young? Why Congress and not local? And some of my answers to people with those are, we haven't been given a choice. Like, we don't actually want to run for political office. Most of us would much rather be doing other things. This isn't a career for us. This isn't because we want some path to some, you know, be on some presidential cabinet administration one day. We are seeing that if we don't get involved, we're not going to have a future to live through, right? And so we're being forced to get involved earlier at a more existential level. And so it would be great if I had political inclinations and I wanted to start at school board and work my way up. Fine. We've got a seat here where somebody, because term limits are awesome, she's out, she cannot run for re-election this term. And so instead of having to unseat an incumbent, we have an open seat. I'm encouraging anybody that wants to run for that. I still am going for Congress. Number one, that's not my district to run in. It's a county supervisor. So number one, it's not my district and my county to run in. Number two, I see the issues. Yeah, we've got some issues locally, but I see what we have here that works, that I would like to help apply and be a fighter and an advocate for on the national stage to expand the good resources and things that we have here to make sure the rest of the country has those as well. And then come home, and when our local administrators and legislators are being knuckleheads and dragging their feet on policies and things that our community wants, you use your pressure and your power as a national legislator to stand in their office and say, what are you doing? Why aren't you fighting for this? We need to get this taken care of. So we have to make this big jump. We have to jump into something that we don't really want to do as our career or our life plan, because it's do or die. It's existential, be it economically, politically, environmentally, all kinds of things. We feel we don't have a choice. We have to get involved and do this. And so I think that is also probably why we're more willing to collaborate, because I think all of us are more, like you said, solution focused and issue based rather than party. You're different from me. You have different leanings. We vote for different people. I could have immediately said, well, I'm just not going to talk to you. But our generation is not about that. We're driven to solutions. So we're like, all right, look, because you've found a different path. We started at the same point, right? We both were Bernie Sanders, and then we diverged. So there's things that we know we can agree on. And then I think it's an even better opportunity for you to say, hey, this is how I got here, and this is why this did this or whatever. And you're going to share with me things that I'm never going to have been introduced to, never exposed to. And that's really where the magic happens, is the confluence of those two things. So yeah, I think us being forced to grow earlier, get involved earlier, all of the things that, the threads that we've been talking about all night, I think that's probably why we're all getting involved, and then why we're more willing to work with one another to get things done. If that is the reason, I'm glad for it, whatever the reason.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think in many ways our art was sort of building into this sort of a direction, even like with the Star Wars stuff with Disney. They were pushing towards sort of the gray Jedi kind of an angle, and they were talking about how the Jedi Order used to be one that believed in balancing the light and the dark, and that they would go to the dark energy planet when they were too in the light, go to the light energy planet when they were too in the dark, and meditate and find balance again. And so I think this is happening in one sense because the toxicity and the fighting has gotten so intense and crazy that it needs to be fought through unity, through like good faith efforts and everything, because it's been allowed to get kind of out of control. We're not talking to each other, and we're going to lose the common ground we do have if we don't. And like I said, I think we have common ground in terms of goals, like what you were saying, but but it's not necessarily obvious if you don't feel like you can talk to that person. So like you talked about our generation. Our generation has a better capacity to recognize history and feel apart from it because of the internet. Everything feels so new. I think it's easier for us to, like, even within politics, for someone on the left to believe that the Republicans, those old people over there or whatever, are racist. But when you meet with someone face to face in person that's kind of under 40, the last thing you're going to assume, unless they start with N words left and right or something, is that they're racist. It's just, you don't assume that of young people. So I think there's so many guards that are down. We can sort of engage in this. And
that's a good point.
I think, at least with Jordan Peterson's work, we've seen a convergence of science and religion, of what the world is, the is question and the ought, like what the world is and what we ought to do while we're in it. Those two fundamental questions, we've sort of seen it come together through some of his work and through a bunch of other things. And I think this is the time, this is the moment for it to happen. I wanted to talk about, I used to want to make a documentary called The 100-Year Fall, talking about America, because around the time of, I think it's Calvin Coolidge or Woodrow Wilson. I always confuse those two because their names are, WWCC. So I'm always I'm always confusing them. But anyways, around the time of the Federal Reserve coming into place and World War One sort of being the first
Wilson.
industrial war, we've been on this path of unease, of collapse, and of in some ways pushing forward into our values and in other ways deviating away from them. There's lots of like fundamental rights in America that have been eroding and like the Patriot Act. I wanted to talk about the Patriot Act, obviously because of 9/11 today. Like there's things that we previously took for granted that have slowly been eroding, and now you know we're at a new stage with vaccine mandates and all that kind of stuff. And you know, I talked about humans are battling between what we should do and what our body tells us to do, the animal and the ideal. And you can have your ideal sense of what should happen with society, and then there's what happens with society, which is totally different. The Gini coefficient is a measurement of economic inequality. And as it stretches beyond a certain threshold of too much inequality, violence goes up in every single society, because if the current hierarchy cannot support resources for the entire hierarchy, it will be disrupted until one can, and you'll literally just have endless disruption. So the biology, so we can have whatever ideals we want, but you can't ignore economic inequality, because it's not like you can say the individual, it's okay. You can't say the individual is now allowed to go commit violence because they're poor, but you could acknowledge that societally, when you have too much economic inequality, you have increases in violence, and it's just gonna happen. So it's something worth avoiding if you can manage that. I wanted to carry that into someone who was asking questions in the little question thing on this live, asked about, I was talking about violence in certain communities, or like people that commit like murderers and stuff. They were talking about how many of those people are victims themselves or were abused. And absolutely, when you have the same neighborhood, the same multi-generational sort of thing, if there's a lot of murderers and rapists in that community, what do you think is going to happen to that community, right? Like you definitely have that cycle of violence. And you talked about how, well, first off, like capitalism, it's a weird word to define, because like right-wingers have their own meaning, left-wingers have their own meaning, and then my definition is like the most basic one I can think of, which is just like any system of capital, which is like any system of money. So it's kind of like distinguishing China from Germany, from the United States, from Australia, from Norway. It's like they're all capitalist, like in that sense. Like you're not really escaping capital being redistributed and those basic labor capital sort of elements being at play. There's just more centralized and decentralized versions of it.
And I think that's the difference, because in financial structures historically, it's what is valued and what is the commodity, and then also the structures of power. So we've had several different financial structures throughout human history, ones that haven't even really been categorized, and just basic barter system and trade, all the way up to then, they really start being locked in and categorized with feudalism. And you can see with each one of feudalism to mercantilism to capitalism, so you're right. All societies have always existed off of some type of capital and currency. And so to take capital at that definition, then you're right. Everybody has always been some form of capital, because that's just even if you're trading
chickens for goats.
Right, exactly. Especially once we started it, there's always been something worth value that was traded. But once we started minting money, basically, once we went from, okay, it's not sacks of rice for your chickens, it's you've got to have metal coinage or ore or whatever, different variations of how they needed it smelted and in what methods. But so I would say that the difference now is in what drives it, and the end goal is really what defines our modern capitalism. And it just is a system where we're creating our own resources, and we have the freedom, because it's if you go with the free market explanation and understanding of it, it's that, because with mercantilism and even with feudalism, a lord or the king would set the prices, would do this, and you can't do this, and all the merchants had to sell at a certain rate. And so it's who had the control over the products. Even as a merchant, you didn't have full control and autonomy under mercantilism. And so I think capitalism is really a rebuke to that, especially when it goes to its extremes to where people think that it shouldn't be controlled at all. I think that is a rebuke of not being able to have any control. Just like you were talking about earlier with gender roles, right? Same thing with financial and economic structures and roles. When you are told you can't do something, it's either, number one, it makes you want to break away from that. And once you do, sometimes we go too far and then we do things that are more damaging rather than if the system were just allowed to shift into its next phase. And so I think that's where there's often a huge miss in communication, especially between the right and the left, or any type of conservative versus socialist or leftist, is that it has to be capitalism versus socialism, or capitalism versus communism, or that they're at odds with one another. And where I really think that we need a happy blend of, it needs to be we need to shift what our priorities are as a nation, but we can still do that with a capitalist structure, in that you as a business are free to set your prices and do things within reason. And then that's where we need the guardrails so that there's not exploitation. Because left to its own devices, if it can exploit, it will continue exploiting, especially if it gets away with it. If it can steal an apple, it's going to keep stealing, it's going to keep stealing, it's going to keep stealing until that business collapses, it gets caught, whatever, there's consequences. But until it hits a wall, until it's met by some type of pushback, be it a person, like you were saying, bully to a bully, hey, you can't take advantage of this person anymore, I'm going to stand up and tell you no, right? And so I think that that's more what I don't think we should burn down capitalism. I don't think that we need to completely change our entire structure. I think it's, especially I think that there's also this, it's a intentionally forced dichotomy that people are saying that capitalism and democracy are antithesis to one another. I think that capitalism in its truest intent is supposed to be economic democracy. And that you get to do what you want with your business. If you want to run a massage business, if you want to make t-shirts, if you want to run a trash company, you go do what you want to do, what makes you happy, what you're going to provide for your family, as long as you are being a contributing resident to your community, paying your taxes, doing things, contributing in other ways, hiring people at a living wage so that those people can have good families and good lives, so that the education gets better, right? And then we all benefit. And I think that that is where all of this gets lost, and that when there's any type of restriction wanted to be put on capitalism or corporations or companies, there's sometimes intentionally bad faith arguments where people come out the woodwork saying, oh, if you raise the minimum wage, you're going to destroy small businesses, where there's things that we can do to protect small businesses, when really it's the corporations that are lobbying to not raise the minimum wage. But they use the false and the scapegoat of, we're really concerned with small businesses. Well, if you were really concerned with small businesses, you'd stop swallowing them up and putting them out of business, right? Like, so they take something that could be true and they twist it and they make it seem like it's not for them and that they're doing it for somebody else. But we really do need those guardrails. It's not that putting some type of restriction on a corporation is because we hate capital and we don't think anybody should ever make profits. It's because we want the small mom and pop to be able to make profits too. We want them to be able to provide for their family and grow. And so I think that, a lot of what you've touched on is kind of some of the solutions. I think that capitalism needs to be checked and put back on its right path, and so that it's economic democracy, so that we can all achieve our best selves instead of being a wage slave to somebody else. Because that's the restriction that we're all been locked into right now, is that you don't have any other, and that's part of why we haven't been able to pay attention before 2016. You wake up, most of us wake up, go to work, come home. If we're lucky, we get to come home, take care of our kids, and go to bed. My life was, I got dropped off at school. I took the bus to school. I rode the bus from school to daycare. I got picked up from daycare. My mom would take me home, feed me dinner, get me started on the homework, take a shower, drop me off with the babysitter, and go back to work. what quality of life am I getting? What quality of life is my mom getting? And it's not that I had a bad mom. And you can be a good parent as a single parent if she had had the financial means to not have to work so hard to provide for me, right? So it's not just that being a single mom is bad. It's not just that doing this and that doing that. It's the what we put people through just to survive. And I was listening to something earlier where we can actually trace where it went from the erosion of, like you were talking about, you know, the 50s vibe where dad goes and works, mom stays home and take care of everything. We got to a point in the 60s and 70s where our wages eroded to such a point as the cost of everything skyrocketed that it was no longer one person who could afford to provide for the same family. So it wasn't that families were getting big. It wasn't that we were spending more money or living more lavish lives. Is that our wages bought less. Our labor and our intensity at the same rate produced and rewarded us with less and less over time. And this is, again, where my argument for some of the social programs like Medicare for All, like college and different the public free college and trade schools are only in a benefit to capitalism as well as a living wage. Because if you keep raising my rent, and if you keep raising taxes, and if you keep raising the cost of your gizmos and gadgets, but my wages stay here, tuition keeps going up, rent keeps going up, how long before I'm priced out of my house? How long before I can't continue to buy your TV or afford to upgrade my car so that it's within smog regulation standards? And then we're known polluters. And like, right, it's just a spiral of things that if we just had enough money to live, your business would do better. Our economy would thrive. We would all benefit, your business included, from allowing us to have a higher wage. But they're the ones fighting it because they don't want to cut into their bottom line. And that's where we have to force them to do the right thing because they won't. And I don't have all the answers for how to force these people to do the right thing, but I think that that's what it is. We don't need to burn capitalism to the ground. We don't need to burn democracy to the ground. We don't need to burn our electoral system to the ground. We need to put guardrails in place to allow it to be its best self, to allow capitalism to flourish in it what it was intended to be and do. And you wanted to talk to the Patriot Act, and that actually ties into this, is a control and a forced direction of things. I think the Patriot Act is a huge mistake and where a lot of things went wrong with our societal understanding of things, what we allowed, what we tolerated. And I have debates with people about this on the left when they were cheering, for instance, this is a great example, Donald Trump being removed from Twitter and Facebook. The left cheering that on. Like, what is wrong with you? You're next.
But don't you understand that corporations have the right to run their business however they want?
And that's then,
there was this moment where right-wingers were saying that Lil Nas X, and I didn't like his music video. I thought it was over the line a little bit. You know, he wouldn't be that disrespectful to any other religion, but Lil Nas X's video where he like lap dances with the devil and stuff, they were like, it needs to be banned, it needs to be off YouTube. So like right-wingers were anti-free speech and for censorship, and then left-wingers were like, but no, corporations need to be able to do whatever they want. It's their business. They should. And I was sitting here in the middle like, you guys, you do not understand what you are doing. Like, I'm sitting here off the side like, holy crap.
Right? And that is actually happening a lot right now. I'm seeing that very thing go back and forth, right? Where the right accuses the left of cancel culture while it's canceling people left and right. And then the left is cheering on censorship. And this is something that I am just fed up with everybody. We've seen it with the freeze snap in Texas. We've seen it with, again, New Orleans being devastated. You know, oh, well, you should have voted. That's what you got sick with COVID. Well, you deserve to die and not be treated in a hospital because you didn't get the vaccine. Like, people, no matter what side you're on, no matter what argument you're making, if you are making the argument and you consider yourself
a moral person that wants everybody to have health care for all, if you think you're a moral person because you're pro-life, whichever way you define yourself as being moral and protecting life and wanting to keep people alive, and then you're turning around and saying, ha, that's what you get for voting a certain way, you deserve to suffer and die. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. And especially with, again, Medicare for all. Oh, you're going to collaborate with libertarians? You're going to collaborate with Republicans? I'm sorry. Medicare for all means all. I'm not fighting for Medicare for leftists. I'm not fighting for Medicare for socialists. I'm fighting for Medicare for all. And if we don't bring the people into the conversation that we're trying to advocate for, then like, what are you doing? Like, and so it's just, you're absolutely right. We've got right wingers cheering, the censorship and the removal, trying to get somebody banned for something, when they're usually, in some cases, screaming, oh, no holds barred. Corporations can do whatever they want. And then we're seeing, and I'm just like,
yeah.
And earlier, literally, as I'm walking into a store, and I had this thought in my head all the time, we've had several things that our government has had to step in and do for the public good. No shirt, no shoes, no service. Right? But that was because people were walking with bloody feet, stuff like that, right? It was a hygiene issue to keep people safe. Then we go the next step, right? Every business reserves the right to refuse anyone's service. Okay? Yes, we can get mad when somebody admits that they're denying somebody service because they're gay, or if they admit that they're denying somebody service because they're a conservative Trumper. We can get mad at them acknowledging that and saying that out loud, but we still have to respect their right as a business to do so. And no, we don't want them to say that out loud, and it can go into where it gets to be intentionally hateful and racist, and there's things. But that's where, as a society, we have to sit down and talk about compassion and understanding and trying to find a way to do things better. But there is that fine line. And so
it's interesting because the Civil Rights Act, part of it was making it so you can't do that. You cannot discriminate based off of certain sort of aspects of the individual. And so it's it was basically, so it's like economic inclusivity, saying you cannot keep these people out for X, Y reason. And so, so you did sort of touch on, you have the public health interests and then the rights of, your ability to refuse work or whatever. It's interesting because there was the issue of the baker that was Christian that didn't want to bake a custom wedding for a gay couple. They said they would sell a regular cake, but they didn't want to do the custom thing because it was art and they didn't feel comfortable with it. And so it was sort of you had religious and identity sort of issues under civil rights law sort of competing there, because it's should you be able to force them to go against their religion in any kind of way? And I'm in favor of because it doesn't make economic sense to be a segregationist, or to I'm not going to hire a good worker because they're black. Well, then that means your competitor gets to hire a good black worker. So it's you lose out economically if you are a discriminator. But it's interesting because I'm on the sort of cancel culture front, we believe that if you discriminate, if you kick someone off of Twitter for their religious beliefs, then there would be an issue. But if it was their political beliefs, another voluntary belief system, that isn't protected under law. And I've thought a lot about that being sort of a new frontier for civil rights law, to say if we are going to be American, we are going to believe in freedom of speech, then I can't fire you because you're a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter or whatever, a communist. You can say no politics at work. That's fine. That's a fair rule. And then you just talk about it on your free time. But to say because of your politics, I'm firing you that can't be okay. And so the government does intrude in this way, but it's the idea of economic inclusivity. So if it's going to be there, it's got to be all the way, or it can't be there. And then we're talking about undoing civil rights law, and that's its own complicated thing. I wanted to finish off a point earlier One, I don't want to get into the details of why, but I actually think the minimum wage, the goals of the minimum wage can be achieved without it. And there's certain negative side consequences to the minimum wage. I have a video on it, so you could look it up later. We could talk about it another time. But I wanted to touch on a few points. One, in terms of teams, you were sort of talking earlier about how we can't be on Team Republican or Democrat or whatever. So I think like our philosophical sort of allegiance should be to humanity, but politically and in the political realm, our team should be America first, and our teammates should be our fellow Americans. Then you could sort of say within the American system and within the goals of our country, what are we aiming for? But you should try to mentally approach it as those are your teammates as much as possible, because it's whenever you have a team, all sorts of things come off of that. You have your allies, your enemies, the geniuses within, the morons on the outside, and you can start to create this otherizing effect where it's like, oh, those people over there, they're X, Y, or Z. But if it's us, then you can't attack us at the same way you can attack them. And so it's a different way of approaching it.
Absolutely.
And then you talked about poverty and sort of you need to be able to help people out of that absolute sort of position of suffering. So here's sort of how I approach it, because you were talking about like you want capitalism, but you also want socialism, and there's those conflicts, and people will like, you're not a pure whatever, right? People will attack you on that front. Every human being has a certain creative and productive capacity, a certain ability. That ability can be monetized in the marketplace to some degree. Some people more, some people less. Not everyone's creative and productive capacity and its ability to be monetized in the market will hit the level of covering cost of living. And so we sort of recognize that there will be poverty always, and we need to do something about it. And even though some conservatives will argue that they believe welfare is sort of this inherent issue, there's not a lot of actual clout or like energy around pulling back welfare programs. And so what we need to have in order to solve that, and also to sort of solve the Gini coefficient economic inequality issue I talked about earlier, is something that makes sure you have a base level of resources. And so that's, you know, the safety net, or what, like if you say you have the safety net, but then you fall off the side of the net, right? Like it's not really working for you. So if like only when you go and you fill out the right paperwork and you go to the right offices and you are, you know, in a dysfunctional situation in life, then we'll give you money. That creates all these sort of other situations where people aren't getting paid. So you're not treating them like you're treating the people that are dysfunctional, but you're also kind of incentivizing people to stay there. If I give your kids health care and give you reduced rent and a stipend of cash for your food or whatever every month, and the second you get a better job, it's gone. And so like you gain 10 grand a year in income, but you lose 25 grand a year in benefits, you're not going to make that choice, because your children are literally going to lose health care if you make that choice. So I wanted to get to this, my UBICIL program, my UBI sort of alternative program, is an attempt to fix welfare. So I sent you a link. I put up a video earlier today on my YouTube channel breaking down this in more detail. But basically, my main critique of the welfare system is not that it exists, but that it creates these perverse incentives where the government is getting in the way of people doing what they would do if it wasn't doing anything at all. And so if you have the government intervene in a way that is behaviorally neutral, you can get around some of these issues. So there's two versions of the UBICIL or UBI-SIL program that I would be willing to play around with. One is the full 12 grand a year, $1,000 a month, and then a portion of it is what I'm about to talk about. But because of the way the country works and the way these programs will actually be implemented, like personally me, I would do this at the state level. And so 25% of that 12 grand would be the program, would be a UBICIL program, what I'm about to talk about. So you could call it the Golden State health plan or help plan or whatever. You give every single citizen that's an adult, so you don't get any extra money for kids. If you can't take care of your kids, that's on you. Like that's an issue of neglect and incapacity, not you need extra welfare. But Every adult got $250 a month. Sorry, let me take one step back. All welfare issues fall under one of two categories. You need help month to month to cover your bills, or you have some sudden event where you need money to cover loss of income, to get a surgery, or to get whatever for a hospital visit. So you have month to month, and then you have these big time expenses. If you have a system where you have a guaranteed income going to people of $250 a month or $3,000 a year, that solves the month to month issue. And regardless of what they do, whether they get a better job or a worse job or wherever they move, they're getting that money. They know that support's there. And if it's a couple, that's $500 a month.
Okay.
Now, that income, because it's a guaranteed income, you can make it, it's the most safe way to create a leverageable, like a loan, an opportunity for a loan. So if you have a guaranteed income, you could take a loan on that guaranteed income, and the loan would be guaranteed to be paid off because the government is making sure that money will keep being there. And so you could have it where it's 5% interest and 5% principal being paid on this loan. That $3,000 a year you're getting from the government could be leveraged up to $30,000 a year or $60,000 for a couple. And you can do that anytime you want. And where the money comes from is within the system. So every adult is getting $250 a month. Not every adult will need it. So those who don't need it can give it for free or at up to 5% interest to anyone else in the system. And it's as decentralized as you want. So someone could say, I'll give my money to anyone. Someone could say, I'll give my money to anyone, but for no interest. People can say, I'm only going to give my money to Daniel Wilson when he needs it for his personal needs, because I know he has health issues or whatever. And so I want to be there to make sure I'm supporting him, but he doesn't necessarily need it now. So it's like on tap. You'd want total control. So the individuals have the control, the democratic aspect of it, whatever you want to call it, decentralized. It's the individuals that have the power over what's happening to the money. And that would sort of be a universal retrofit of all of the welfare issues. So whether it's healthcare or retirement or whatever, it's sort of like one economic system that can help, or one welfare system that is behavior neutral, that gives you all the tools you need to better yourself in life. And when everyone knows everyone else in society has this, there's an accountability that will come with that. Not a now you can slack off, now you're a loser, now you can do whatever, but actually everyone knows you're getting this help. If you're still screwing up your life, it's on you. That is one of the most unique, literally I invented the program. I've never heard anyone talk about any kind of a system like this. So this is this is me. And so I'd love to see it rolled out, but yeah, so I think that is one of the main solutions to many of the economic problems that we have, and mainly the welfare ones. And because people are dependent on welfare, you can't just rip it out from underneath them, even if you think the ideal society is one with no welfare. You have to have one where they start getting on the right track and building their own wealth and everything. And, ultimately, if people are less poor, better off, they're more productive, more engaged, The way to measure whether or not this would be successful would be to look at labor participation, to say if you switch to this program, are people participating in the economy more, working more, or starting up businesses or whatever it may be. So, yeah. And you touched on regulations, and I just wanted to touch on that real quick. That's a great moderate policy example, because sometimes regulations are great, and sometimes they're unnecessary and useless, and they don't achieve anything. And there's like 150,000 regulations just at the federal level. So to try to have a rule about regulations in general, and not even understanding that the word regulation, it's not one thing, depending on which sector you're talking about, the structures of what the regulatory agencies are doing can be very different. It's difficult to have a one size fits all rule, but you can sort of have a two categories rule where it's if it's really increasing quality or maintaining quality in the marketplace, so it's saying you can't have food that's toxic or whatever, then it's fine. And if it's causing unnecessary cost to comply with the regulation, you should try to eliminate it or reduce the cost or make it work in such a way to where it's cheaper for businesses. So like if you've already built a house, if you're a construction company, you've already built something and it's up to code, the city should just assume everything you will build in the future is also going to be up to code, and after the fact, go inspect it. So you sort of grandfather people into this so that they go through the process of screening once, and that's it. That's one of many potential solutions for trying to handle regulations. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
No, that's good. So let me respond to that, and then let's one thing that I do want to still talk about is I want to explain the ballot envelope, and then I do have to hop off of here after we're done with this hour segment, but obviously, absolutely would love to do this again. So let's go ahead and set it up.
Yeah.
So I think the UBISO program and the idea has a lot of good qualities and a lot of good merit, and it absolutely is something that could work and be applied. My only thing is as a replacement, and this was my issue with Andrew Yang's model of the UBI being $1,000 a month, but then it's instead of welfare and it cuts everything else. And same thing like you're saying, where it has to at least replace, right there. You can't just pull the rug out you've got to, even if you're going to eliminate the thing, you've got to give them a way to get a transitionary period or assistance to get from one to the other. And then my only concern with it being a catch-all is that 250 might be too low. But the idea, I really like the idea, and we would just maybe need to work out some of the numbers and what it would cover. But the idea is not bad, and it definitely has merit. And
the other metrics it's being weighed against, so cost of living and rent and all that stuff, those are not fixed numbers. Those are flexible. So that $250 a month on top of whatever incomes and everything, it can look in Texas and Oklahoma, it looks a lot different than in California. So it's
sure.
And a lot of people say this on the minimum wage issue, it should be higher in higher, cost of living areas. And I think there's something to that for sure. Like I think it should be up to the city, but I think that, there's something to say like San Francisco should have a minimum wage of like $25 an hour or something,
Right. And see, and then here's where is what I think should be where we meet at the happy middle, but that, the extreme capitalists, bucket this is that, so that's where, and just like you and I keep going back to, that's where I think federally you need to set the guardrail. Okay. No state in this country will allow anybody. So federally they set the minimum. Nobody in this country can make less than $12 an hour. It's got to be, we need at least 15. Because even if you look at our metrics, there's nowhere in this country that a single person can live for less than $15 an hour. Even in some of the cheapest states, even in some of the lowest areas, because they're not factoring, they think you can live off of $7 an hour, but they're not factoring in just, the cost of medicines and other things. Like our metric for what we measure, what people need to live off of, being able to have any type of savings to cover a flat tire or an emergency. They don't account for any of that. They think this is what you need to buy the cheapest place, which they're never available, get the cheapest food, which you're not guaranteed, right? Like they're putting everything at the minimum that you could possibly subsist on and saying that's good enough. And it's not good enough. And our poverty numbers are actually no longer valid anymore. We haven't updated our poverty metrics since the 70s or before, to where what it says today is the poverty line. We really need to increase it. And there's a couple reasons why they won't. It'll make everybody look bad. It'll throw our numbers. Everything will go crazy. But that's the reason why some things are so skewed. So what I think is we set a federal minimum. And then you're absolutely right. San Francisco, it costs you so much more to live there. So then either California as a state can have a higher minimum wage like it already does, or then the local city. And so say this, we set a federal minimum wage at 15. California says that's not enough for us. We're going to say a state mandate of $18 an hour. And then San Francisco says that's not really enough for our people. We're going to do 20. And so that's what I think is the happy medium and the happy blending of states' rights, federal rights, protecting the workers and working for the corporation, making it so that everybody benefits. So we set a minimum, and then the states and the cities can go above and beyond. But if we don't put that bottom guardrail in, we're learning, especially with the unemployment and the medical failures of systems across, especially the rural Midwest and the South, to where because these states had chosen to opt out of Medicare Part D or different things, they hadn't taken the money that they were given from the federal government to upgrade their employment system, and so it crashed. Like things like that, that's where we need the minimum. Like all of our residents should have access to the same quality unemployment, this, that, and the other. And then the states can go above and beyond to do additional stuff that they have the resources or the desire to do so. And so you're right, it should cost more to live in San Francisco, or you should be paid more in San Francisco because it costs more. But I still think that there needs to be a state federal minimum, because even right now with that federal minimum of $7.25, like that's just disgusting. And the fact that we have a tipped federal minimum wage of like $2.70, like I lived on that. I waited tables and bartended for $2 an hour. The problem with that is that, number one, especially when you live in a poor community, because the people that you're waiting tables for are making minimum wage just like you, they don't have the money to tip. And if they don't tip you, you don't make any money that week. And there's no law that you have to tip. It's just you hope they will. No matter how good your service is, if that person doesn't have the money, now granted, they can get into a whole argument, wow, they shouldn't be eating, blah, 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 whatever. That is not a reason that the worker should be penalized. We should not allow this system and that employment agency, the restaurant, whatever it is, to reap all of those benefits and legally pay this person $2.75 an hour, knowing that they're not going to get tips, but getting all of the labor off of them as if they were making this wage, you know? And so I've seen it with my own eyes, my own experience, where businesses and corporations, usually bigger ones, small mom and pops typically have no problem paying people whatever they can afford. They're usually a lot better. And so that's why I hate this argument that, oh, you're going to hurt small businesses. No, small businesses want to pay their people better. The only people fighting this are the big corporations where it's going to hurt their bottom lines. If a small mom and pop can afford to raise their wages, they typically do, because they care about their workers and they care about all of them growing. And so you don't have to hold those people hostage. It's the bigger corporations who only see red, who only see bottom lines, where you have to, you know, be that bully and stand up for the little guy who doesn't have a voice and say, no, you're going to pay this server $10 an hour and they're still going to get tips. Like, it blew my mind when I showed up in California and I had people that weren't tipping that I was going out to dinner with, and I was like, what is wrong with you? You're a terrible person. And I was almost getting in like fights with these people. Finally, somebody sat me down and they were like, look, number one, that person makes $12 an hour, and I gave them what I could afford at that time. And I said, well, hold on. They make $12 an hour? Okay, you can only, then I will not scream at you anymore for 10%. But back home, 10% on a $20 bill, that's $2. I might have spent 4 hours with you for $2, right? Like, so that's where you're right. States and localities, absolutely. But I do think that we need a guardrail. Because another instance
the shortest way I can explain this is, you can have a naturally occurring essential minimum wage, meaning you don't find any jobs paying less than whatever, with labor scarcity in the local market. When I went and lived in Utah, I saw the minimum wage there was $8, but the only place hiring for under 10 was the thrift store, and it was $9.25. And every other place it was $10.25 and up. And it's just because when you run out of people to hire, you have to raise wages to try to find people. And so they were paying $10.25 an hour to 15-year-olds working part-time while in high school, because that's all they could find because of the tightness of the labor market. So there's natural market conditions under which you have an essential minimum wage. And and so there are ways to achieve it. And I do think that, like, looking at different ways, like if you consider the cost of a house in Texas on the income of someone in California, that person in California is looking pretty rich. But if you look at someone who has an income from Utah living in San Francisco, they're, you know, homeless. So so there's a lot of you know, gradations there. But I wanted to, before we have to go, I did want to talk briefly about the voter security thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
So
the
I'll get into
concern is if someone's careless, if someone votes to recall Newsom and they're careless with how they put their stuff in, that vote can be seen if you shuffle the envelope the right way. That's the concern as I understand it.
Okay, that is absolutely not true. Not that that's not a concern, but that that's possible. So, and the reason that is, and I've got my ballot here. I haven't filled anything out, so I can use mine to show. So the yes and the no on the first question is over here on the left. Now, if you flip it, there is a very small chance that they might be able to see this, but I don't even think they can see who you would pick, and here's why. Because the hole is in the middle. And so there's no way for this yes or no to line up with that hole. No matter which way you put it in the envelope, you're never going to see that, ever, because it's all the way over here. So that's not true. And even, like I said, right here, you can't see the circles all the way over here, right? So that's an impossibility. There's no way to see what somebody voted.
So the people who have been showing it, it's been either fake ballots or it's been weird.
They had to like origami it. I mean, so here's my stuff, like, you know, so this is how it came in the mail. Just a crease in the middle. So now, yeah, okay, so here's the only way that I can see it happening, because I mean, you see it, right? The question is on the left-hand side. So the only way that I could see that is if you folded it like this and then folded it like this. But even then, it would only be if you voted yes, or if you folded it this way and you voted no. And even then, I mean, you'd have to like really, like even halfway, it doesn't line up. So I would say that these people were origamiing it. Like you would almost have to make it intentionally visible. And, you know, I'm not going to put this on anyone's side. Last year, with all of the election fraud claims, the only fraud that was happening was by the people making claims that there was fraud. Like the only actual fraud that happened last year was people put out their own ballot collection boxes that weren't government, that the counties didn't put out. So now we can get into whoever did that, but that had nothing to do with a state or a government agency doing anything to anybody's ballots. That was an individual actor.
Low security issue.
Right, and because that wasn't a sanctioned ballot drop-off. So that wasn't a government issue at all. That was somebody intentionally trying to mislead people. So now, whether it was a political party, a political group, or an individual actor, it wasn't the government. So it wasn't California committing fraud. It wasn't California trying to help the Democrats over the Republicans. It was an independent actor trying to shape the election. So yes, something did happen. But as soon as those ballot boxes were identified, they were immediately taken down, and immediate releases were put out on the news, through press, with number one, pictures of the valid ones, and to clarify and explain to people what to look for. So, you know, yes, things did happen. We cannot say that nothing has ever gone wrong. We cannot say that there haven't been attempts to commit fraud. But what I can say, both working the polls as a volunteer on the outside and then working as a county elections official on the inside, that California has some of the best regulations and practices put in place to give us the most accurate election that we can. Is it perfect? No. Are there things that can be improved? Yes. But looking at some of the other things that other states are going through, the other laws and regulations, and I'm not an expert on other states' laws, but knowing what our county officials and our state legislation has gone through and crafted for us, what I consider for our residents. I don't consider anything that I've seen in California legislation to be voter prohibitive. From what I see, and you know, I'm willing to hear if somebody has a claim that there is something that's voter prohibitive, but what I've seen, and alongside the people that I've worked with, everything was about making sure that the voter could vote. You know, and now that's just Ventura County, and that's the only one that I can speak of having specific experience. There might be other cities in California where there's problems. There might be other counties, you know, but based off what I know of our regulations and how my local civil servants provided and served the public, they did everything they could to make sure that we all got the safest, securest election that we could. Now, I do want to tell you, so just real quick before we get off of this, and if I don't know how much time we have, but so I want to tell everybody what this hole is for. So anybody that's watching, and for you, anybody that you have a conversation with. The hole is, and this is why it upset me the most, is because the hole is actually there to make sure that your ballot counts. And so that's when I get really upset when there's misinformation put out, whether it's intentional or otherwise, especially when it is something that's there for our good and it's put shade on or painted in a bad light to make it seem like it's to harm us when it's really there to help us. It's like, this is so good. So what it is so my county, I don't know how many people in your county. We have 800,000 people, over 500,000 registered voters, and one county elections office that processes all of these ballots. So you can't do all that by hand. You just can't as far as certain processes of it. So we have it's called a machine opener. And so there's a thing that we put in a stack and it slices just the top of the envelope off, and then it goes down and there's little sticky things and then it pulls open the envelope. And then a human hand reaches in and pulls out that ballot. So now what happens is the envelope goes into a bin and then the ballot gets unfolded and put in a bin. Nothing's looked at, nothing, this isn't counting. Envelope in one place, ballot unfolded, put in another place. And then the envelopes are taken into another room. And what's happening back there is somebody is sitting, and we had over 508,000 registered. We had 422,000 people vote in November's election. 422,000 ballots came through. The majority of them vote by mail. You can't do most of that by hand, but this part we do because it's so important. After
how much higher,
the ballot,
this is a side note, but how much higher was that than your normal voter turnout?
I'd have to look at the numbers. I don't know the previous percentage, but I know that this time we hit 80% voter turnout, and it was a record high for our county. Just from March, from our primary election in March to November, we had a registration spike of 30,000 people. We went from 470,000 registered to 508,000, and of that, 422,000 cast a ballot. So 80% turnout. I'd have to go look at the specific numbers. I know that last year was our highest turnout for everything, because in the second place person in the primary got as much as the incumbent usually gets, just to show you how much it was skewed. So yeah, definitely record turnout last year. But so imagine that. Imagine, processing all of this. And even with all of that, there's still a determination to make sure that our ballot, all 422,000 of those ballots are counted and accurately. And so what happens is, so those envelopes get dumped in a bin, and then they get taken and put in another room. And there's somebody sitting in that room with that envelope, and I don't have one, I don't have a letter opener, but I'm gonna use a pen, but they sit there, and one by one, with these envelopes and a letter opener, they go like this to make sure that your ballot isn't still in there. We sit and put 400,000 envelopes on a letter opener, and once it gets to the end, then we zip tie it, and then those have to be kept for a certain amount of time. So that is what that hole is there for, is to make sure that an envelope does not get stored, because you have to keep, because it's got a signature on it, this is a record, so these have to be kept for 22 months in a paper storage, and then it gets kept longer term elsewhere. But so that envelope isn't stored for 22 months with your ballot in it never getting counted. So that's what the hole is there for. A person painstakingly sits there and does this for hours every day to make sure that nobody's ballot gets stored without being counted. So that's what the hole is for. And so I didn't know that there had been full videos of, but yeah, so no manipulation, if you get your ballot, it's folded like this. You fill it out, you fold it just like this and put it right in there. There's no way for anybody to see who or what you voted for, unless you do some crazy stuff with it, and then that's your personal choice.
We got 25 seconds, so
all right.
let me try to respond real quick, and then we'll just call it here. So
we can come back on for a few minutes if you want.
That. I'm glad you explained that. But so California's ballot system, or yeah, we'll hop right back on just for a couple minutes, and I'll say my